Okay, it looks like we have the recording started and we're ready to begin. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Tribal Conservation Advisory Council meeting. Just want to take a quick opportunity to introduce myself. So my name is Laura Brules. I am currently serving as the acting state conservationist in South Dakota. I have been in the state since January and I am tentatively scheduled to be here until May. And I took over this position after Jeff Zemprick, after he retired in January. So it's been an absolute honor to be in the state. It is an honor to be serving as the state conservationist, and I am looking forward to meeting with you all today for the tribal advisory meeting. Please know that we want this meeting to be very inviting to you. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have suggestions, please don't hesitate to let us know those. I see that there are still lots of people entering the meeting in the lobby, so we'll just allow those in as they get here. But just a couple of housekeeping items to start out. If you will please ensure that you keep your phones on mute unless you have a question, just for courtesy for those that will be speaking. Also, if you are joining us on the computer and you do have a question or a comment, please feel free to put those in the chat box. We will answer those just as soon as we can or as those come in. But I think that we have a great agenda prepared for today. Like I said, as we go through the agenda, we want to make you aware of what NRCS is doing in the state, but we also want to hear from you. What can we do to help you out? What more can NRCS do? But with that being said, as we start out, we have a little special presentation that we want to start out with. Daryl Duval serves as the state tribal liaison for South Dakota. And Daryl, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. Laura, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. I can hear you great.
Okay. Mr. Jeff Zemprick, are you on the line and can you hear us okay?
I can, Daryl, and coming through loud and clear, and hopefully I am as well.
Yes, you are. Thank you. So, yes, my name is Daryl Duval. For those of you who do not know, I am one of the 8 tribal liaisons in the field with NRCS in South Dakota. And we work with those. We have 8 tribal liaisons throughout the state, as you may or may not be aware, that work in their respective areas of the state. Plus, then I'm also a kind of take on some duties as a state tribal liaison lately. A little history, I did start working with NRCS in '94, several different places in the state. And lately I've been able, the last dozen years, been able to work as a tribal liaison with NRCS here at Lower Brule and Crow Creek. Now the 8 tribal liaisons and us, we decided as a group we wanted to honor Jeff Zemprick, our recently retired state conservationist from South Dakota, with a star quilt. Jeff was here in South Dakota and led these efforts for about 8.5 years. He hosted and led over 20 of these tribal advisory meetings. During that time, he was always very open to creative partnerships and creative projects. He really led the effort and was one of the first to encourage tribally led or tribally supported and submitted proposals for USDA Strike Force Initiative, which was a new initiative that came out of some previous federal administrations. And so that kind of pushed in an era of reservation-wide or reservation-led efforts. Jeff really pushed for that local efforts when we switched some of our EQIP funding from a statewide tribal base to a reservation-wide base. So one of the benefits is we were able to focus more on the concerns of those local users, land users, and land managers and tribal entities within those reservations. And like I said, Jeff was always encouraging to share ideas at these tribal advisory meetings. He always wanted the different tribal leaders or representatives from BIA or NRCS to share what was going on other areas of Indian country so that we could build off of that and learn from the hurdles and from the victories that we were having. So Jeff and we want to formally present this quilt to you. I know that you and I met on Saturday at Chamberlain, and I was able to provide you and give you that quilt, and the pictures should be being displayed now. Jeff, do you see those pictures, and are they showing up?
Sure are, Daryl.
Okay. Jeff, would you have anything you'd like to say?
Boy, just a few words. I'm kind of speechless, but I know that would surprise a few of you that I'd be speechless. But I just want to say thank you so much for this honor. I know what an honor a star quilt is in the Dakota culture. And, just know that I accept this with a lot of appreciation for knowing, that it comes from all of you, a group of people that I worked very hard with for 8.5 years to put a lot of conservation on the landscape, to try to do a lot to care for our natural resources. And this means so much to me. So just thank you, thank you, thank you.
Are there any other tribal liaisons in South Dakota that would like to say a few words?
This is Lauren Odlin here up in Northeast South Dakota. Jeff, just want to thank you for all of the assistance you gave me with working with the Assistant Wahpeton Oyate up here, and wish you the best of luck. And hopefully sometime when I'm down in the Sioux Falls area, can run into you down there sometime. Congratulations.
Thanks, Lauren. That'd be great. And maybe sometime I'll get to travel to the Northeast and see your work. So I do hope that I am able to continue to help in different ways with conservation. And so I'm anxious that many of you as partners, I'll get a chance to see again in the future. So thank you.
And I just wanted to say thank you, Jeff, for everything over the last 8.5 years. It's hard to believe it was that long ago and it went by that fast. So you did a lot of things.
Thanks, Dave. I agree with you. Time goes really quick. But I've always appreciated working with you as well.
Jeff, we all thank you. And if there's no other comments from tribal liaisons or anyone else, I'll turn it back to you, Laura.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Daryl, and congratulations, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have had huge shoes to fill since you retired. You were so involved. You were so great assistance to the state and assistance to the tribes. And so I appreciate everything that you've done. And so it's been great to step in here in South Dakota and try to fill in where you left off. So appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Laura. Appreciate it. And I hear you're doing really well. So all the comments are great. So keep up the great work. Thank you so much for filling in.
Yep. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, we'll move on with the agenda. But the first thing that I did want to mention, and maybe this is something just to consider in the future, I do want this to be a very engaging meeting. I want the tribes to be able to speak up. I had the opportunity yesterday to sit in on a national tribal meeting. It was called a talking circle. And what they did is they started that talking circle off with a traditional prayer. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Elder Ted Herrera. He's out of New Mexico right now, but Ted led the meeting off with a traditional prayer. Just something to think about in the future. Maybe that's something that the tribe would like to be involved in, but definitely want this to be engaging and for you to be involved. We want to move on. So we have a presentation for the Plant Materials Center update. As David gives his presentation, if there are opportunities where the agency can help out the tribe as far as plantings or plant species, please feel free to put those in the chat. But David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, can hear you great.
Okay. to try and share content. That'll work. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Basically, the Plant Materials Center, this is the 2020 Progress Report of Activities. And the plant material is located in Bismarck, North Dakota, and it's been around about 70 years. It serves North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. If you go to the plant materials website, it's listed right here in the upper right-hand corner. You can kind of see some of the things that they've done, some of the things they're doing. And this if you look up this progress report, it kind of explains it a little better. Basically, if you look at the needs of the region for what the Plant Materials Center does, needs of the region include adapted grasses, forbs, legumes, trees, and shrubs for prairie restoration, wetland and riparian sites, filter strips, saline and alkaline sites, wildlife food plots, alternative income crops, windbreaks, shoreline stabilization, agroforestry, pollinator habitat, livestock grazing, and soil health. So that's just kind of a brief rundown. If you look over here on the right, you can kind of see some of the things that they've been doing in 2020. And what we do is we have an annual meeting and we go over what they have going on, and they kind of give us a report on what they're doing, and then they put out a publication like this. They always call it the plant chat that they put out. So if you go in there, you can look at different projects they're working on. If you look over here, you can see that the Tober germplasm Virginia wild rye was released. They're doing a perennial warm season grass establishment study, a forb establishment trial, tall fescue orchard grass trial, seeding grass into stubble, seeding depth of perennial grasses, field plantings, and then they have off-center evaluations where they put out different species and then they evaluate them for different soil and different areas and growing areas. Cover crop demonstrations, or what'll grow best and what type of soil. They do some tribal outreach, feed the people. They have a garden there. They give out vegetables, potential releases of species that they're working on, herbaceous seed production and distribution, and their publications. So if you go down through here, this is a picture of the Plant Materials Center, the green buildings, and the Lincoln Oaks Nursery right here. And their office is located on the north end right along these trees here. So the staff is, the plant materials specialist is Ed Baum. He's their new plant materials specialist. And then Lucas Schmeising took over the plant materials manager, and the rest of the staff is still there. So just to give you an idea, there's been a little bit of a change at the top there. Here's your grass seed trial where they're releasing the Virginia wild rye, and the perennial warm season grass establishment. You can kind of see if it's weedy, things like that. So, forb establishment trial, tall fescue and orchard grass trial, seeding grass into the stubble, seeding depth of perennial grasses, field plantings, off-center evaluations, tribal outreach. They're giving out sweetgrass this year. So if you're interested, we do have a form that we send out, and I sent it to Kathy Irving. She can attach it and send it out. And then there's their garden. So I guess that's just a little bit of a quick rundown on the Plant Materials Center.
Okay, thanks so much, David. Again, if you have comments or questions more about the Plant Materials Center, if there's something that we can do to help you out, again, please feel free to put those in the chat when we will see what we can do to help you out. David, if you don't mind, I think that you're still sharing your screen, if you don't mind stopping.
That do it?
Yes, sir, that did it. Thank you so much. I was seeing multiple of me on the screen, and I don't know that we need to see that. So thanks so much, David. Next presentation. As you will know, the state is a huge advocate of soil health. Our NRCS strategic plan includes a lot of information on soil health, education on soil health. So we have Kent Bleeker, and he is going to give a soil health update for the state.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen with you quick. Okay, so yeah, it's been a long time since I've gotten to speak with many of you, and even longer since I've seen a lot of you. But I'm grateful to be with you all this morning to talk about the fourth principle in our series of the no-till doesn't work and neither do cover crops series. So just as a reminder, we're going to cover our 5 principles of soil health to get started, just because I like to make sure everyone's off on the same foot. So these are our 5 principles, and you can see we've got them broken down into 2 categories. The categories that are in the orangish color are protecting the soils category, and everything else in the green, those principles are in the feeding the soil category. So we've discussed keep the soil covered. We've discussed minimizing soil disturbance. And the last time we spoke, it was maximizing plant diversity. And today we're going to cover a very important principle. They're all important, but the maximizing living roots is when we're looking at feeding the soil and regenerating our soil and doing what we can to improve it and to build soil organic matter. Living roots are proving to be very important. And the more I learn from producers and our folks in academia, the more I realize the importance of these having living roots in our soils. Okay, so when you look at this image here, I would like for you all to kind of take a snapshot, if you will, of this in your mind. And when we go to the next slide, just try and remember this photo here. And so what you're seeing here is a really diverse cover crop mix, and it's with a producer that I've been fortunate to work with quite closely. And there's actually 18 species in this cover crop mix. It's a very green mass on your screen, but just trust that there's a lot of species diversity in here. So keeping that picture in mind, compare that to what we see here. Now I know this is just an illustration, but it's a very effective illustration. It's been around for quite a while. You'll see different versions of it, but this is my favorite version of it, and it shows a lot of our native plants that we have here in South Dakota that are somewhat common in South Dakota. And it shows that, yes, while they have that obvious diversity that we can see above ground with their above ground structure and flowering types, and just their biomass production above ground, their variability and diversity below ground is just as prevalent. And that's what we're trying to show here. We're all existing in our native prairies throughout South Dakota. You can still find all these plants to some semblance throughout the state. And before we continue on, I would like to draw everyone's attention to the left side of this illustration. I know the words are very small on the bottom, so I'll tell you what they are. The very far left side of the illustration is showing Kentucky bluegrass, what most consider to be an invasive species, invasive grass species throughout South Dakota. And it's in most people's lawns throughout the state. It's all throughout our rangeland, whether it's been restored or even our native rangeland. It's invaded all over the place. And if you look at it, it's only illustrated to be at its tallest, 6-7 inches tall on the above ground, and the rooting structure below ground is even less impressive, 4 to 6 inches at the most. And you can see that just doesn't really cut it when you're comparing it to our native plants. You start looking at our big blue stem and our switchgrass, the really impressive root system of lead plant and compass plant. You can see that our native plants had that rooting structure diversity and they all could access and do different things below ground. So as we continue on with this presentation today, just keep that in mind. Our native plants that were out there, established with the prairie over millennia, really had it figured out, and we're basically just trying to catch up now. Okay, so we're going to discuss the many things that a living root does for the soil, and why it's important to have living roots in there as often as possible. Today I'm going to focus a lot on our cropland side of keeping living roots in our cropland systems, and I'm doing that mainly because I think that's the area of most opportunity. We do have a lot of grasslands throughout the state. West River especially is pretty heavily still in our prairie system, so they have those living roots out there, and there's opportunities there also. But I'm going to focus pretty hard on the cropland side today. So as you look at these two side-by-side photos, these photos were taken on the same day, kind of in central South Dakota, and I'm just really trying to show a contrast. One picture is mostly green, and the other picture is not so much. It's mostly brown. The soil looks pretty beat up, and it's dried and cracked. So I think all of us know which soil is on the upswing here, which soil is improving, which soil has more life. It's very obvious. But why is that? Why do we intuitively know that? And I think it's because we all know what plants do. They're alive. And most of us learn or have learned either in high school or secondary education why that plant is alive, why it's able to produce energy, and that's through photosynthesis. And so that plant is able to take that carbon dioxide that's in the air and sunlight, and through photosynthesis, it produces energy for itself. And those energies are in the form of sugars mostly. And not only does it use those sugars and that energy to grow, both above ground and below ground, it also uses a pretty high percentage of that energy that's produced to feed the soil, and that's through root exudates. It's basically pumping sugars into the soil. And that plant isn't doing that just to be nice and to have good feelings about itself. It's doing that to feed the below ground life, the bacteria, the fungi, and the larger fauna that's below ground, earthworms and some of our mite systems. So that's what's going on. This is the really most important thing you need to know about having a living root. Okay, the next slide I'm going to show you. This is a study that was done by Navdeep Singh and Sandeep Kumar. They were kind of spearheaded it, and then they put this fact sheet out with the results of that, and that was with the help of Anthony Bly and David Karki. So I'm trying to make sure I give credit to where credit is due here. But you can find this on SDSU's extension site. It's really easy to find under their agronomy or conservation headings. And I'm just going to share a snippet of it with you today, and hopefully I can drive home the importance of what they did. So what they did is they took cores in a couple of different systems. They took a core from a low diversity corn soybean with heavy tillage system, and they took a core from a soil health cropland system, so it had a high diversity 3-crop rotation with cover crops and livestock integrated. And then they also took a core from some really well managed native rangeland. The two illustrations you see on the left of your screen are from the cropland. And what they did is they took those cores and they basically put them through a CT scan. So long and short is they x-rayed it. Just like if you had to go in for a CT scan or an MRI, they took those cores and took them into one of those machines. And then it was able to put on illustration what we see here today. So what you're looking at is the results of that scan. And the green that you see is basically pore space. So if you ever go to a demonstration on soil health, a lot of times you'll see people like me that'll hold up two cores of soil or two clods of soil, and we'll say, what's the difference between these two? One is a good soil health system, one is not so much. And oftentimes people can see a difference in color. They can sometimes see the difference that there's a little more pore space in one of the others, but it's basically you can only really see. We don't have x-ray vision. We can't see what's going on within those clods. And they were able to do that with this scan. The bottom illustration is the soil health system, and you can see that it's a lot more of those green blobs in there, so that means there's more pore space. I do not have included, just for the sake of time, I don't have the well-managed native range core, but that was even more impressive. It was something like 65 or 70% pore space of the total volume. So people like me often talk about having 50% pore space is kind of ideal, but under our native range system, it was even more. And if you look at the two side-by-side shovels there, that's representative of these two fields, and you can see the difference. One is quite blocky and compacted, and the other one has that nice cottage cheese look that we like to see. Okay, another thing that living root does is it can help to remediate and prevent salinity in our soils. Now, I know this is a bigger issue in some parts of the state than others, but it's as I drive across the state, I see it all over the place. And it's becoming more prevalent. We're having a little more higher rainfall years on average, and that's what's helping to exacerbate this situation. So those living roots in the soil, they're taking up moisture, and they're taking that moisture through the roots and bringing it through the top of the plant, instead of allowing that moisture to come to the soil surface through capillary action, drawing those salts with it. And so this is just a photo of some cereal rye. And this producer is realizing that he needs to utilize more moisture throughout the year. And so he's got cereal rye established here, and then he'll follow with his commodity crop afterwards. And you can see the obvious salinity area in there. The cereal rye is not growing in the very heavily saline areas, but it is growing on the edges and using moisture, which is what we need to do to address these saline areas. Okay, the next one. A living root captures and releases nutrients. And so what you're seeing here is some soybeans from last year that are just getting going, and you can see a very heavy residue that's actually still standing. And what that residue is a small grain that was the soybeans were seeded directly into those small grains, and then the small grains were terminated. And what happens over time is that small grain is very high in its carbon ratio compared to nitrogen. And so it slowly releases the nutrients over the course of the year. We've got the soybeans that are growing in there, and they are capturing the nutrients. And we all know soybeans are legumes, so they are building nitrogen, hopefully, in the system. So that's another reason to have a living root. Okay, so how do we do some of these practices? I've covered a couple of the positives for having living roots in our system, building those aggregates, creating pore space. Putting energy in there, feeding the soil life. We've talked about hopefully addressing salinity and nutrient reclamation with living roots. But how do we do that in a practical sense? How does a producer say, yes, I want more living roots, but how do we do that on my ground? And what we can see here is a couple of examples. We've got the first photo on the upper left of a producer green seeding soybeans into standing cereal rye. That's one method to do this. We've got the next one on the upper right of an established cover crop following small grains. That's probably the most common form of cover crop we see in South Dakota is following small grains, just because it's relatively easy to do. You harvest those small grains mid to later summer, and you're able to hopefully go directly behind that combine and get a cover crop established for grazing in the fall. The next one we see in the lower left is just a photo of interseeding into corn, and this is kind of the end result of that just before the corn is harvested. And there's a lot of opportunity for this in South Dakota. This is a great way if you've got livestock to get them maybe off of your grasslands a little sooner and allow that grassland to get some rest before going into winter. And it's also a way to keep those cattle out of the lots a little bit longer in the winter. So a lot of opportunities there. And the last one we see, and this is one of my favorite photos. It's kind of what I kind of have pictured in my mind's eye for what agriculture should be like, hopefully, in the next 10 to 20 years. And that's having a more serious discussion of land use. And so this is a producer that's established a native plant and pollinator plot directly next to one of his crop fields. And those native perennials have been established on an area that was very low producing on the crop field, and just really wasn't economical for them. So they've established this pollinator and native plant plot, and it's really helping to decrease pests on his cropland field next door. And so this is just a couple of the examples that we can do to establish in a practical way and economical way on our production systems throughout South Dakota. This is one that, if you remember from the previous presentation when we were talking about diversity, and this is a photo courtesy of Jason Mock. If you're a fan of soil health and YouTube, you probably heard of Jason. He's in one of the I states, and he's a very creative producer. And he's growing small grains, he's growing wheat alongside with his soybeans here, and he actually harvests the wheat while the soybean is still growing. So very creative ways that we can look at diversifying our systems, keeping living roots in the systems longer, and still being very productive. So with that, that is the end of my presentation, and I would certainly open it up to any comments or questions that anyone may have.
Thanks so much, Kent. It looks like the crowd is pretty quiet today, so no questions or comments. If you do have any and you don't want to speak up, please feel free to put those in the chat. I know since we are meeting virtually today, there are a lot of individuals that are logged on to the meeting, but there are some that are listening in by phone. For those that are on by phone, please feel free to unmute if you have questions. Hopefully through the email traffic that you were able to get a copy of Kent's presentation. But as we go through presentations today, as we go through the agenda, please think for future agenda items, if there are other trainings that you would like to receive, if there's other informational PowerPoints that you're interested in, that you would like for us as an agency to consider, please feel free to let us know on those. But thanks so much, Kent. We appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, next, moving on with the agenda, want to introduce Colette Kessler. She is the Assistant State for Partnership right now in South Dakota. She's just recently, within the past year, been hired for this new position in the state. So I am going to turn it over to Colette, and she's going to present on just a couple of conservation opportunities that are available to the state.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everyone. So one of the duties with the new position for the partnerships position for South Dakota is to work with the grants and agreements program. So in South Dakota, we have the grant agreements, which many of you have seen, as we have called them over the past several years, as CCGs. They're Conservation Collaboration Grant Agreements. And then the other opportunity that we have is the Conservation Collaboration Cooperative Agreements. So the biggest difference between those two types of agreements is the ability of the partnering organization to provide match. So if you've got some match, small or large, whatever, in kind or cash, whatever, that would be more of a cooperative agreement than the grant agreement. But the exciting news is that both of those opportunities were posted on grants.gov. So they changed a few things nationally over the last year or so, and all of the applications for the funding opportunities are posted on grants.gov. So you just www.grants.gov, and in your packet with this meeting, there's a fact sheet that has all of this information on it, so you can retrieve it from there. So I'm going to hit some of the highlights, but definitely check out that fact sheet. So, okay, so on that grants.gov website, you do a keyword search for NRCS South Dakota, and that will pull up the opportunities for the grant agreements or the cooperative agreements. So the cooperative are due June 8th, and the grant agreements are due June 11th. So they will receive those nationally, and then they'll come back to South Dakota where we get a chance to review them to see how they fit with our state goals and that sort of thing. So we're hoping by early July that we should have some selections made, and people that were interested in applying for the opportunities should consider their project to start this fiscal year yet, which would be still to start in September. So all those details are in the fact sheet, but keep those in mind. The one thing that you'll want to watch for, so we've had some really great and successful grant agreements with several partners in our state. And If you're new to the application process, you'll want to go to the grants.gov website early and get your account set up, because it does take a little time. And you must have your SAM and your DUN up to date. So those could take a little time too, a couple of weeks to get activated if you've never had that done before. So just want to give you a heads up to be prepared, and I hope to see some really cool applications coming in from you guys. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact any of your liaisons or me or the state office, and we'll get somebody to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Colette. Again, for Colette's presentation, if you're listening in today, there is a copy of the fact sheet included in the information for the presentations today. If we need to add those to the chat, please let us know for convenience, and we can do that. Okay, moving on with presentations, I have Val, and she is going to present on the conservation implementation strategy. There's also a fact sheet included on this, but Val, I want to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, good morning. My name is Val Duprez, and I'm the Acting Assistant State Conservationist for Programs, and I am very honored to join you today. So I am here to visit about the conservation implementation strategy. We've been offering this opportunity to our partners for a couple of years now. So what is the conservation implementation strategy? We refer to it as CIS, and basically what it is doing is allowing our partners to apply for financial assistance to address items of concern in their local area. So if there's an identified resource concern or suite of resource concerns that you are seeing within your countryside and you would like to take a leadership role at the local effort and request funds to address those resource concerns, the CIS would help you do that. So our CIS proposals are due on an annual basis once a year. We just had a batching date in May and accepted our second year of proposals, and we're implementing our first year proposals. So in year one, we selected 16 projects across the state, and those areas have conservation contracts going being obligated right now. So the conservation is starting in those areas to address those high priority resource concerns. The projects are funded for multiple years, so this is just the beginning of the good things that those projects are going to provide to those local areas. We just accepted our second batching period, or second year of applications, and we're looking through those at this point in time. We are very pleased. We had over 30 applications, and we are starting to look at our funding, available funding, and those CIS applications, and we look forward to announcing our projects soon. So in your handouts, there is this fact sheet that gives some general information about it. If you have questions, please reach out to myself or any of our employees. We are definitely here to support your local conservation, and this is a great vehicle to achieve it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Val. Appreciate you joining us and presenting on the conservation implementation strategy. For the participants today, if you think that this is something that you may be interested in the future, please feel free to reach out to us as far as an agency and or to our field office staff or to the liaisons to see if there's something that we can do to assist. We also have a presentation from the Farm Service Agency. We want to ensure that they're included on these meetings in case there's any updates that they have that the tribe might be interested in. So I believe that we have Owen with us today. Owen, are you there?
I am, thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to you then.
All right. First off, I'd like to extend a welcome from Jamie White, our acting state executive director. She had a conflicting meeting today and is unable to attend, so I'll be representing the Farm Service Agency in the discussion today. The topic items that were asked of the Farm Service Agency were to discuss the emergency haying provisions and other grazing opportunities on CRP lands. The 2018 Farm Bill did expand the authorities to the Conservation Reserve Program in expanding the suite of conservation practices that are eligible for haying or grazing. There are some other provisions that then attach to the policy with those legislative changes, and I'll review those briefly here today with some excerpts from our policy handbook. So the first one we'll talk about is the non-emergency haying or grazing eligibility. Again, this expanded to a multitude of practices within that are administered in the state of South Dakota. As you can read on the chart there with me, the non-emergency grazing is conducted outside the primary nesting season. Our primary nesting season dates are May 1 to August 1 of each calendar year. So we're coming into the primary nesting season here shortly at the end of April. But the non-emergency grazing allows it not more than every other year. So you can utilize that grazing acreage on an every other year basis. The non-emergency grazing during the primary nesting season, there is opportunity for that, but you have to stock the acreage with a 50% reduction in the carrying capacity. Grazing control to control invasive species, that's determined by the conservation plan, and it's specific to the kudzu and other invasive species. So you would work with your local NRCS office to help identify any invasives that may be on that acreage. The non-emergency haying, which is probably the most exercised practice within the state of South Dakota, cannot happen more than once every 3 years with a 25% of the acreage unharvested. So you can hay 75% of the acreage. If you set that acreage up on a rotation basis, you would have to leave a certain percent of that based on that rotation. In all of these instances, there is a 25% payment reduction on the acreage utilized. So if you're only haying, an example on the non-emergency haying, if you're only haying a third of the acreage, you would only be reduced on 25% of the actual acreage that was utilized or hayed. If you're grazing the acreage and you're grazing the entire acreage, you would take the 25% on the entire acreage. There are opportunities where there is no payment reduction. When it's utilized by a beginning farmer grazing outside the primary nesting season, there is no payment reduction. What we have to be mindful of there, though, is that the beginning farmer or rancher has to be on the actual CRP1 contract with a share greater than 0 to exercise that opportunity. So they must be a part of that CRP contract. Incidental grazing outside the primary nesting season, this is to glean crops, utilize crop residue that surrounds the contract acreage that's under CRP, and that can be utilized as well. I'm going to now switch to the emergency, or it's an additional table, I guess you would say. Let me get to it here. Bear with me. Sometimes I'm not technically advanced as I should be. So this table is more inclusive. It's actually 3 pages, but we've got the non-emergency harvesting for hay or biomass. Again, I spoke to that previously. Not more than once every 3 years. If emergency haying is utilized, that would restart the frequency. So emergency haying would basically trump any other haying activities from prior years and allow that activity to happen. The emergency grazing, again, is outside the nesting season, and there are some practices that are not eligible. In this example, a lot of these are tree practices, which would not allow the grazing opportunities. Incidental grazing lists the practices, and again, these are adjacent to a lot of wetland type practices. And getting down to the emergency haying. So emergency haying, again, expanded some of the authorities to more conservation practices within South Dakota. The qualifications for emergency haying changed, and it follows the drought monitor in a lot of cases. If there is a county that meets at the D2 level, that would trigger the emergency haying opportunity, or it can show a 40% loss of production for a 4-month previous time frame. And that would allow the emergency haying to kick in. As we go along, if the county triggers for the livestock forage program, LFP, which is a D2 status of the drought monitor for 8 weeks, a D3 or a D4 status for 1 day, that limits our availability on the CRP acreage to not more than 50% of the acres. And it also limits us to the practices listed here, the CP1, CP2, 4D, 10, 18B, and 18C. So the higher the drought severity, the more limited we are with the emergency haying availability. Producers must request approval before haying the eligible acreage. And there's some time frames that are given to get that haying activity completed. There is no payment reduction when emergency haying kicks in, and a participant that's a contract holder can lease or rent out that haying right to another participant. In all cases, the product received from the non-emergency haying or the emergency haying activities can be marketed or sold after the activity has taken place. Most times it would be utilized through that individual contract holder's operation, but we do have situations where it's an absentee landlord or someone that has retired from farming and they still would be able to exercise those haying opportunities. Emergency grazing, again, is outside the primary nesting season. Same qualifications for eligibility on the haying or the grazing acreage on that CRP contract. So I see there's a question in the chat. Contracts that were put in place prior to 18 eligible for these grazing or haying allowances, or are they limited to contracts that started in 18 or later? The answer to that would be that any contract in effect can adopt the newest provisions allowed under statute or policy. That being said, anything that was in prior to these and has an approved conservation plan on file can continue to exercise that approved conservation plan provisions as well. But any contract can adopt the newest provisions that would be allowed under the current Farm Bill. So I guess with that, Laura, I'd turn it back and open it up for any additional questions if there are any.
Thanks so much, Owen. Does anyone else have any questions?
Hello, Owen. This is Lauren Odlin up in Sisseton.
Yes.
I have kind of a question here, or a thought process. What would be the chances? Okay, we'd like to develop few more actually tribal operators up in the area. And so with some of the CRP, if we had a CRP contract that was a tribal contract, tribally owned land, basically the land is owned, if it's tribal land, it belongs to the people. Would it be a possibility to have a beginning farmer tribal operator be able to do some of the grazing or haying without the 25% cost? Would that be something that could be thought of?
In that example, the actual beginning farmer as an individual would have to receive a share greater than 0 on that tribally owned ground. The way the
right,
today.
I understand I understand that's the way it is, but I mean, would that be something that would be a thought going forward to be looked at? Like I said, we're trying to,
Yeah,
it'd be nice to get some people started and it's just kind of hard with the land rents.
sure. I'm
And
not.
how would
It
we,
could be, but that would have to start with an actual statutory change, because currently the statute's what drives the policy, and that's the requirement for that share greater than 0.
okay,
But if that,
Would they as tribal members have a share of greater than 0 in tribal land?
could the tribal members have a share greater than 0 on the tribal land?
The Sisseton tribe, if it's anything like my tribe, owns all of this stuff collectively among the members of the tribe.
Okay,
Each of them could be thought of as an individual owner of their share of that land. Would that get around your statutory requirement?
well, they could be, they'd still have to qualify as a beginning farmer. It doesn't expand it.
Yeah, in that scenario, the one that the gentleman was talking about.
Correct. And if they qualified as the beginning farmer and they were on the contract for a share greater than 0, then they could qualify for the no reduction on that haying activity.
So would like a tribal resolution designating that person as having a share greater than 0 on that contract land qualify them?
They would actually have to be a signatory to that CRP1, signing to that share greater than 0 for the life of that CRP contract.
okay, thank you. Who would, if the tribe wanted to pursue, who would they contact, to get something in the future? I realize right now it is what it is, but if that was something that was to be pursued to see if it could be added into, the provisions or whatever, what
Sure.
would be the route that the tribe would want to take to pursue that?
Of course, most of the statutorial changes are made legislatively, so my guidance would be to reach out to the congressional and senators within the state to elevate those concerns.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yep, you're welcome.
As an addendum to that, there's also an Office of Tribal Relations in the Department of Ag. There's a young lady named Heather Dawn Thompson, who's a tribal member from Cheyenne River, that is running that. It might be a good place to start. It's their job to help you coordinate this stuff.
Thank you.
I'll add on to that as well. Lauren, Intertribal Ag Council is working on submitting comments to USDA. If you have contacts at Sisseton Wahpeton that are interested in pursuing this, we'd be more than happy to visit with them and ensure that these comments are included in ours, but that we push forward.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Owen?
Thanks, Owen. And if there is anything after the fact, you can sure reach out to our FSA state office and they'll get you in touch with myself, or you can email me at my owen.fagerhog@usda.gov. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us, Owen. If you don't mind, will you put your contact information and your email address in the chat, just so they have that in case it's needed? I also see there's one more comment in the chat in case you're looking in that, or if you need more information. Colette Kessler, if you need information on agreements or the fact sheets that we talked about previously, her email address is included in the chat box if you're interested in looking at that. Okay, moving on with the agenda. As far as our agency on our practice and our standards for practices that are implemented in the field, we want you as a group to be aware if there have been any changes to those, if there have been any updates on those. That way, if it's a practice that you're interested in installing, maybe on tribal lands or on your property, that you are aware of those changes ahead of time. So we have Emily Helms with us today, and she's going to provide an update to you on those changes. Emily, are you with us?
Yeah. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you.
Perfect. Let me see, I'm gonna share my screen. And not share that. Okay. You all can see this?
Yes, we can see
All
that.
right. Cool. So today I'm going to give an update on the conservation practice standard updates. So in the 2018 Farm Bill required all conservation practice standards to be reviewed. So far, 74 practices have been reviewed and updated on a national level. So now it's the state's jobs to update their standards. So September 30th, the national headquarters released updates to multiple vegetative and engineering standards. And today I'll be focusing on the updates we're making to 4 standards: herbaceous weed treatment, prescribed burning, forage harvest management, and pasture and hay planting. So to start off, herbaceous weed treatment, the national changes were fairly minor. They added a purpose statement and determined a purpose was duplicative, and so they merged them together. They changed some terminology and added some additional requirements to the plans and specifications section. For our state changes to the standard based on national, we just added a few pieces of language about making sure that the South Dakota licensing and certification requirements are being met, along with just a standard C documentation requirements to make sure that when you're applying this standard that you're meeting all of the needs and making sure you have all the proper job sheets filled out. So then the next standard that got updated for ecological sciences was prescribed burning. This standard was last revised in 2010, so it had a lot of kind of updates that they made on a national level. They did change the definition a little bit. Instead of saying controlled fire applied to a predetermined area, they changed it to planned fire. They also added soil health to the purposes section and added smoke management to the criteria section. And they also added and updated the references section. They didn't have a references section before, so that was an important addition. On the state side of things for South Dakota, we just added a few extra pieces to the general criteria of what all needs to be included in a burn plan, including like a detailed map and description of the fire break conditions, surrounding fuels and access points, along with emergency response contexts that need to be included in the burn plan. We also added that you need a contingency plan and a mop-up plan, and then said to go, we're also, along with updating the prescribed burning standard in South Dakota, we will be releasing 2 new technical notes on prescribed burning. Tech Note 12 and Tech Note 13 will focus on prescribed burn planning and planning prescribed burning based on objectives. So those will be coming out hopefully by the end of the month. And then forage harvest management, nationally, the definition was reworded to improve clarity of this standard. They just kind of removed some of the extra words. They also added 2 new purposes: optimizing soil microbial life and aggregate stability, and reducing soil compaction. And then they added criteria and updated the considerations and references sections. On the state side of things for forage harvest management, we just added to one part of the general criteria to see the implementation requirements, which is our new word for job sheets, in order to find information on stubble height and regrowth requirements. Forage harvest management in South Dakota hadn't been updated since 2011, I think, so this was 10 years 10 years ago was the last time it got updated, so this will be kind of a just, it'll be good to have a fresh view on it, I suppose. The last one is pasture and hay planting. The big change here was that they changed the name from forage and biomass planting to pasture and hay planting. It used to be called pasture and hay planting back in the day, I guess, and now it's returned to that original name. They added air quality as a purpose and removed produced feedstock for biofuel production. They also split a purpose into improve water quality and improve soil health, and then added criteria for each of the new purposes added, and then updated considerations, plans, and specifications, and references sections. The state side of things, we took the guidance from our previous version of the forage and biomass planting standard, and we stuck it into our Tech Note 4, the Perennial Vegetation Establishment Guide, and just added in this verbiage to send people to that Tech Note instead of all of the information for implementing this practice being within the standard. This kind of allows us to make changes on a more timely basis if there's a need for that. Also added to the considerations about planting monocultures, just to be aware that a diverse mix will promote a healthier stand in the long term, and also kind of that standard seed documentation requirements. So we did send these out to the State Tech Committee over a month ago to make comments on the state changes to the standards, and those were due Monday, April 12th. And if you guys have any final comments, just let me know before the end of the week, just so we can try to get these out by the end of April. And then the standards, along with their associated documents, will be posted on the electronic field office tech guide, and hopefully they'll be good to go for a few more years. But with that, here's my contact information, and I will also put my email in the chat at the end of this. So that's my quick update on conservation practice standards. The engineering staff is also working on updating the terrace standard, so that will also be released by the end of the month as well. So if you guys have any questions, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Okay, thanks so much, Emily. We appreciate you joining us and presenting on an update. Again, if you have questions on those, please don't hesitate to contact us. If you need further explanation on any of these standards, we would be happy to provide that. So moving along with the agenda. So as far as program updates, we'd like to provide an update on the programs that we offer as far as NRCS, and then that way you are aware of what's going on with those programs. And we're going to start out with both the Environmental Quality Incentives Program and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program with updates from Jennifer Wirtz.
Good morning, everyone. I will give a quick update. I was looking through the handouts. They're a little bit out of order, I believe. So let me share my screen with you. And this one comes after the fact sheet on CIS. And it's actually part of the EQIP allocation breakdown. And this just shows the projects that were selected for funding in fiscal year 2020 for funding in fiscal year 21. So this is where we're at with those 16 projects, approximately $2.6 million for those projects. They're in various stages right now. Most of them have had batching periods and ranked. There's a couple of them that need to continue with the ranking and get those ranked and selected. But we will get those all funded as soon as possible. And they're progressing. Some are having a little more success than others, but that is normal. And then scrolling past Emily's presentation in the handouts is the other breakdown for EQIP with the allocation. In total, we had $15 million as our initial allocation. And we took, the CIS took that 2.6 million. And here's just showing where we initially started breaking down into our resource unit fund pools, tribal fund pools here. And we have organic, on-farm energy, seasonal high tunnel, the National Water Quality Initiative, forest, the honeybee pollinator initiative, wildlife and soil health, sage grouse, beginning farmer, socially disadvantaged, and ag waste management. Those are the other, all of these listed down here are statewide fund pools. These up here are the more specific on the initial allocation. We started making selections for funding a couple of weeks ago. Right now, I'd say there's approximately 213 that are going for funding at this moment. Funds are shifting back and forth right now, so it's hard to say exactly where they're going to fall. And we have made a request for additional funds to come into South Dakota, and we just have not heard on that request yet. So if we get more money from that request, we'll be funding more applications. So, excuse me. Is there any questions on EQIP? I'm not going into real specifics on applications yet, just because we're still in the tentatively unstable part of selecting and not have some confident numbers of where we're going to land. Any questions at all on that? And I believe I was up to talk a little bit on RCPP, and my segment of RCPP is going to be on our existing projects that we will currently have a sign up for. We had 2 left out there with Ducks Unlimited, and only one of them for the Prairie Pothole area has funding available left in it. And we're having a real targeted sign up this year just because there's not much for funding. It's only around $70,000 in Kingsbury and Minor County is where Ducks Unlimited had planned to target the last remaining funds there. Val, that you was going to talk, I think, on the other projects, so I can stop sharing and let her jump on.
Before you jump on, hi, this is Kelsey Scott with Intertribal Ag Council. I do have a couple of questions just to ensure that everybody on the call is aware. How is the initial fund pool broken down per reservation pool?
It is a combination of implementation rate with the acreage we're looking at the acreage of the reservation lands. In total, it's 19%, and then each of the reservations is broke out from there. I have to find the actual split out of how the land. The 19% is coming from BIA as a total.
Okay, so then if that's the number, then are those funds limited specifically to reaching tribal lands?
They are for any lands within the reservation plus any fee and trust outside of the reservation boundary.
And what are the expectations for being able to qualify? Is it based on your enrollment status if you're not within the boundary, or?
The tribal fund pools are based on just that physical location of within the boundary of the reservation or fee and trust land outside of the reservation. There's no limitation to whether the applicant is an enrolled member or not on those funds.
Okay, thank you for clarification.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
All right. Relative to the RCPP, we had 5 projects selected within South Dakota last year, and one is a partner project with another state. The other state is the lead, and so they're progressing through that process. South Dakota had 1 RCPP renewal, so that means it was the original project was funded under the 2014 Farm Bill, and they had an opportunity to renew their project. That project was accepted, and the partner is now going through the renewal process. We have 2 other projects that we consider newly funded projects, and those are RCPP classic applications, and those 2 projects are probably 80% of the way done with the process to come up with to be able to obligate contracts using the dollars they requested with the RCPP funds. So we've got those 2 projects well on their way to being able to go to contract by the end of the fiscal year. We've got another project that's making progress towards completing the renewal. And then we have another project, they call it an AFA, and that type of project allows the partner to use our technical assistance and financial assistance to target conservation of their that they feel is that they targeted with the application. So in this particular case, that partner is targeting soil health in South Dakota, soil health and some grasslands in North Dakota, as well as soil health and grasslands in Montana. And that partner is working through the project proposal, and I'm not sure we'll be able to have a lot of big sign up with that particular partner this year, but they're definitely making progress. So we've got 2 RCPP projects that are close to going to being active and accepting sign up periods this year. We've got one with a partner up in North Dakota that is working through the process. We've got one that's an AFA type agreement. So they're working through the process, and that partner will administer the financial assistance and receives the technical assistance to apply the conservation in their target areas. And then we have the renewal that is coming along nicely and is on track to be active by the end of the fiscal year. So we have currently, we are waiting for the announcement of our RCPP Classic application selections. We expect that there will be an announcement soon, hopefully by the end of the month. We had received several applications that we evaluated at the state level and supported for national competition. And we look forward to hearing the results of those RCPP applications sometime, hopefully by the end of the month. At the current time, there's an AFA solicitation for the RCPP agreement. So the AFA is alternative funding agreement, and that's where a partner would be able to receive the financial assistance to administer, as well as the technical assistance that would come with those dollars to target the conservation priorities on a landscape or a geographic area of their choice. So we fund about 15 of those projects on a national basis per year. I believe there's several $1 million available for that effort, and those applications are due at the end of May. So if you have interest, I will put a link in the chat.
Okay, thanks so much, Val. Appreciate it. In case you have not tuned into the chat, there are a couple of questions coming in. I at least want to make sure that you are aware of those. So there was a question that was submitted. If bonus points are awarded if practices are installed on tribal or trust land. The response back on that is that that question has not been included in the local ranking since fiscal year 13, but there is a question in the pond initiative that does cover that. Another response back that there's been some feedback from the field that earmark the funds are not getting to tribal producers. Is there a way to increase that trend? Jen, I don't know if you've seen that one yet or if you have a response for it, but just to let you know that that's there. Also, I believe that that comment was echoed. So just want to, if you haven't tuned into the chat, please make sure that you are looking at those questions that are coming in. Also for the questions coming in, if there's more information that we can provide as far as an agency, there will be minutes that are provided to this meeting. There will be the attachments such as the PowerPoint, but if there's additional information that's needed or clarification, please make sure you let us know on that so we can include it.
Hey Laura, this is Val, and I'm just letting you know that I know Jen is actively working to pull some past ranking templates and pull some information to address the questions in the chat.
Okay, thanks so much, Val. While Jen's pulling those, we'll go ahead and move on for an update on the Conservation Stewardship Program with Joyce.
Good morning. The handout would have our report that was sent out, but I will share my screen so we can run through that quickly. See if I can, are you seeing the handout screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good, okay. Get the right screen up there. So we'll just run through a quick overview of what we've had for CSP this year. We did have the CSP 2021 renewals, and that application deadline was the obligation deadline was February 26th. We did get 65 contracts, and that covered a little over 165,000 acres. And this here in the handout, you can see where those dollars went for the 2021 renewals. And then we'll move on the CSP GCI 2021 contracts. The obligation deadline was December 31st. We did have 46 contracts for a total of 326,600 in the state, and that covered 3,621 acres, just a bit over. So the CSP 2021 classic applications, that deadline was March 26th. We ended up with 1,167 applications, and we have an initial allocation of 7.85 million, which won't go too far, but we're hoping we'll get a little bit more of those funds from the national here shortly. We'll know sometime, but for right now, that's what we have. The CSP Classic Organic and Transitioning Organic was a separate allocation of 200,000, and I didn't check and see how many of those applications I have, but anyway, those also were due March 26th. So then on the CSP 2022 renewals, that application deadline, it actually was extended to April 7th. But it won't be obligated until the first quarter of 2022, which will be after October 1st. And we have 270 of those applications right now. So that's where we are with CSPs. If there's any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'll hand it over.
Okay, thanks so much, Joyce. Appreciate your update. Next, we will move on to updates on easements and the water bank program with Brandon Cockey. Brandon, are you with us? Val, do you know if Brandon is with us or if we lost him?
You know, let me check in on that.
Okay, while we're checking on Brandon, I will go ahead and move on. I'm going to cover today for the Assistant State for Engineers. He is out today, so you may have to bear with me just a little bit. Just a brief update on the Watershed Protection Program. There is a handout in the packet that you received, so just want to provide you just a little bit of information and an update on that. There were 5 projects that were funded for the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. So of those 5 right now, 4 of those projects have been completed. A huge thanks to the local soil and water conservation districts for helping sponsor those structures and working through it. Also involved was the South Dakota Department of Game, Fish and Parks. They also provided financial contributions on some of these sites. So like I said, as for right now, 5 of these sites have been completed, or 4 of the sites have been completed out of the 5, but just a little information where you know where those are. One of them is repair to the Murdo Dam Auxiliary Spillway. One of them is in Jackson County and a repair to the Belvedere Dam and to that auxiliary spillway. Another in Todd County was debris removal. Another one in Bennett County, and then another one on the Brule Watershed District. So just want to at least make you aware of those and that there's work going on in that area. Also, while we're waiting on Brandon, and Val, you may let me know when he joins, but the last handout that I believe that is in your document is the Leopold Conservation Award winners. There's an information sheet in there. I will tell you that NRCS is a huge supporter of these award winners. We usually set in when it comes to selecting the award winners and when they're recognized. If there's ever an opportunity for a tribal member or for tribal land to be included on one of these awards, we sure want you to be aware of it, know the information on the award. There is a website for the Leopold Conservation Award. If you're interested, we can pass that along, but at least want to provide you with a fact sheet on it and make you aware of the award. Val, was Brandon able to join?
All right, I'm not able to get a hold of him, but I will take a look at his notes and I'll give you a summary in just a minute.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks so much, Val. We will just continue to move ahead with the agenda. Next, just somewhat of an interactive session, but we had a request for a presentation on the benefits of fencing on trust lands. And that presentation will be by Sonny Farmer. Sonny, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much for joining. If you have a presentation, I will turn it over to you, or if you'd just like to speak, however you want to handle it.
I just have discussion points today regarding the benefits of fencing. And first of all, I'd like to thank NRCS for giving me this opportunity to speak of that as far as the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Rosewood Sioux Tribe here. I know every reservation is a little bit different, and I'm just going to talk about the benefits that it has here on the Rosebud Reservation. We have a variety of soils and topography within the reservation. We have our sandy grasslands on the southern part of the reservation and up to some clay and badlands on the northern part of it, and also about 100,000 acres of timber and pine of rolling hills. So there is a variety of topography and soils within our reservation. And a little bit of the history on this, of the benefits of it. I became an employee with the Bureau of Indian Affairs in 1995, and at that time, they were on 5-year contracts with the leases. And there are a couple of different types of leases here on the reservation. There are range permits and also farm pasture leases. And they're basically split the acreage wise between them. There's a total of 1 million acres here on the reservation, and about 450,000 acres of it are in range units in which I manage. And back to the 5 years, there was a 5-year permit, but the tribe wanted to go to a 10-year permitting system due to getting producers involved into EQIP and putting these practices on trust ground. And in the past, the NRCS wanted to see that the producer or the tribe had at least a 5-year contract to implement some of these practices. So a lot of these individuals were only eligible the very first year, and after that, they were not eligible due to the timeframes of the contract. So the tribe did switch to the 10-year permits, and it has made a big difference here on the reservation. We were able to reach out to a lot of the producers with the help of our tribal liaison and get some of these practices on the ground. And that has benefited not only our tribal operators, but also some of our tribal programs, such as our Buffalo Ranch, our tribal ranch, and also our local university, Sinte Gleska University, with their Buffalo project. And there are many experts online here that have gave some good presentations, and the benefits of fencing. A lot of us may know of the increased AUMs. The stocking rate hasn't been better in the grazing distribution, but also some of the benefits other than them have been with the multiple pasture and management of these lands have provided better safety for our communities, and also our medicinal plants that a lot of our tribal members use. And with that, we're also looking into the tool of burning. We have a few requests for burning, and without the use of the fences, the multiple pastures, that goal may be achieved here pretty soon. And I wanted to talk a little bit. I know there's been some questions about the funding pool also. And in the past, it has been for tribal operators, our tribal member being qualified for that designated earmark funding. And it has been for the tribal operators, then it moved to the land base, the trust land. Then it was for non-members who had deeded land within the reservation. And I've seen a comment that is very true, that some of our tribal operators now, the way the ranking is done, are kind of being excluded due to the ranking system. And one of the, I guess, suggestion I have is to leave, there should be a greater ranking for a tribal member on trust ground, because we have in the past couple years, since it has changed, where a lot of non-members that have deeded ground within the reservation are using up that funding before tribal members or a tribal program that doesn't rank as high can utilize that to be eligible for EQIP. But that's one of my suggestions from our tribe and some of the tribal members of that ranking. And, you know, the benefits of the fencing has been great. I mentioned the 10-year permitting system, and we had one from 2006 to 2016, and we're on a current one from 2016 to 2026. But our stocking rate on the previous permit was an average was a 2.4 acres per AUM. In our last inventory, which is done at the beginning of the permit period, the stocking rate is a little less, a 2.2. And that might seem minimal, but it does provide a lot more funding for the tribe itself. And it's also a lot of better management for our tribal operators, having multiple pastures and seeing the effects of what a rotational grazing system can do within these range units. I know there is a lot more to do, and I appreciate all the progress that has been made over the last 20 years here on the Rosebud Reservation, and hopefully that can continue. But that is one of the suggestions, is more of a points for ranking for tribal operators on trust ground. If that funding is earmarked based on our land base for the Rosebud Reservation, that our tribe and tribal operators should have equal and maybe a greater opportunity to receive them fundings for these projects. With that, I'd like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity and look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Sonny, and for joining us today. We are, like I said, we're taking minutes. Any recommendations that you're making, whether they be through the chat or through speaking up, we're making sure that we capture those. I see that Val turned her camera back on, so I think maybe she may have a comment.
Yes, would you like me to, I am ready to do the easement update, Laura?
Yes, let's go ahead with the easement update. And then after Val is done, if there's other questions that you have, other recommendations, other concerns, or way that NRCS can help, we will cover those here in just a second. But Val, if you want to go ahead and give that update.
All right. So in 2021, we had 88 applications for the easement applications, and of the 88, we had about 20 that were screened high or very high, and we looked at those high and very high priority applications, and we funded as many as we could with the $3.5 million that we had. So we had requested additional funds, and we're awaiting those to see how far we can fund. I believe we've been able to fund about 6 applications to this point with the dollars we were allocated, and we're hopeful to secure more funding and continue down the funding list. Our offsite monitoring and ownership review is pretty well complete and has been entered into our system. And we are currently doing field checks on compatible use agreements and potential violations, and working with our easement holders to properly manage those areas. Our restorations are making progress as well. We've got a federal contractor that is working on them. They're looking to get some seedings done here as soon as the weather breaks and appears to be a bit more stable moving forward. We've got some stewardship funds. We have about $1 million that we're using to improve our existing WRP, EWP, and WRE easements. You know, we're actively seeking projects to utilize those dollars to improve the existing easements we have. We are currently offering a water bank sign up, so there's a bulletin out for that, and that program provides some additional assistance for flooded lands. So we're currently accepting applications for those. So with that, I believe that that would be an easement report, Laura. And if you would like me to explain or provide any additional information on the way our program tools work and how they evaluate applications, I can try to do so now, or we can provide that information in a written format at a later time.
If you have it available and you can just provide brief information on that so the group is aware, and then we will follow up with additional information. But if you don't mind going ahead and doing that.
Okay, great. So in the past couple of years, we have adopted a new tool to evaluate our resource concerns on the land. We call the tool CART, the Conservation Activity Ranking Tool. So how the process works is we digitize land units, and then those land units come over into this CART program, and the CART program is actually what evaluates the application. It completes an assessment on the land by asking a series of questions and considering soils data, and other environmental data such as streams and impaired streams, and a whole suite of information that we're pulling from a geospatial effort into this assessment. So this assessment considers all of the geospatial information and electronic information that we have tied to that ground, as well as field observations and other questions such as, about things like nutrient management. Do they apply nutrients according to soil tests? That is not something we can see on the ground, but we gather that information through an interview process. So the next step in our CART is, the first step is the assessment. The next step is the ranking. So when this tool functions, it takes all of the information that is in that assessment and it brings it into the ranking side of things. In our system that we used prior, we responded to our ranking through yes, no responses based on field observations and plans that we had done. It was not data driven the way that CART is. So our current system takes all of that data from that assessment on that piece of land and it brings it into the ranking piece. So a lot of what is driving our rankings is that assessment data, and it's evaluating all of our applications the same. So that is a good portion of our ranking. And then on top of the assessment data, we can ask questions that are program specific. So those questions we have control over and we can allocate points to, but it's a limited number of points, and the majority of the points are coming from the assessment that's being completed on the land units offered in an unbiased manner. The assessment does not have any ties to other than the environmental factors that are present on the land. So the assessment comes into the ranking. We have control over some ranking questions, and they have been resource concern based, as well as this year we've included some questions about returning like permission to install, some of the administrative documents that are tied to the contracting process, that if we have all of those things present, we have materials needed at the office for obligation, and it increases the time it increases our efficiency. So our CART tool takes all of that data and it generates a number, and that's how we decide our funding. So with our CART tool this year, we're learning a lot about it. This is our second year using it, but the ranking is bringing in all of that assessment evaluation in a program neutral manner and bringing it into our ranking. So I wanted to provide some information on our CART tool because it's fairly new, and it has removed a lot of the ranking factors that we had manually entered prior, and it's having, it's evaluating all of our applications in a program neutral way. So I felt that would be something beneficial to add to the conversation. And if there are, if there's something more that you have questions on, I can respond to those as well.
Okay, I think we have a question from Guthrie, if you would like to go ahead.
So, thank you for the explanation. When you're talking about them being program neutral, does that take into account programs that were meant specifically to help native ranchers and farmers on tribal trust and fee land? Or does that doing it in a neutral way eliminate that designation for ranking for those producers?
So the tool is evaluating that land based on the environmental factors that are present. So our fund pools split out funds based on in this case, geographic boundaries. So we had allocated a percentage of our funds to the reservation fund pools to target those lands. So our tool takes into consideration all of the environmental assessments on those lands, and then it ranks the applications, and we use the funding that we set aside for those reservation lands, and we fund as far as we can. We have additional funds available through a socially disadvantaged fund pool, which the entire state is open to, and we have those funds set aside specifically for individuals who meet the socially disadvantaged criteria. So we've got funds set aside for those individuals that meet those criterias. We have additional money set aside for the acres that are associated with tribal lands within reservation boundaries, fair trust. And then in addition to that, the applicants that would meet a historically underserved definition, which is a beginning farmer or socially disadvantaged or limited resource producer or farmer, would then also receive a higher payment rate if their application qualified within those reservation boundaries that we have set out, and they also met the criteria for a socially disadvantaged or a historically underserved participant.
So the comment
yes.
made earlier about, so there's a lot of, for my reservation, there's a lot of really large non-native producers, and they own huge chunks of land, and it's fee land, and it's fee land on a reservation, but it's not tribal fee land, it's non-tribal fee land. Those types of applications are eating up all of the resources so that there's just none left for the regular producer. I would assume that the reservation pool funding was designated as a reservation funding because of the fact that there's a bunch of Indians here. And so you would think that that money would be more closely aligned with the tribal fee land and the tribal trust land and the individual lands that tribal members own and manage, and not the non-native producers that live in these areas. I understand that they're being impacted by some of the same things that we are economically, but it seems as though doing this in a neutral way, a program neutral way, is not following through with what was intended when they designated this as a reservation pool land and not just the regular money that every other county gets. Potter County right across the river gets money for EQIP just as much as we do. The difference between Potter County and us is that this is a reservation where there's a bunch of Indians, and it's the Indians that are the socially disadvantaged ones, and the distinction for this reservation pool land is tied to that disadvantage, but it's not providing an advantage to eliminate that disadvantage when the large non-native entities are eating up all the money so that we can't have access to it, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of background to the reservation fund pool that I found. And to my knowledge, the reservation fund pool was never intended to be strictly for Native American producers or historically underserved. It was strictly meant to target those reservation lands in that. So the history that I have come up with is that initially we had it as the American Earmark Fund Pool. Not necessarily the greatest name for a fund pool, but it started back in 2003 with consultation with the Tribal Advisory Committee, and at that time, Janet Ortley as state conservationist. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs was also involved in that discussion. Through that discussion, the respective tribes intended to eventually procure back non-tribal lands on the reservation, and they preferred to improve all land within the entire reservation, not just tribal trust or fee lands. The BIA percentages that were evaluated in 2008 and again in 2012, when Bennett County was added back into the reservation boundary, that percentage was that the reservation acres were approximately 9.2 million acres, and that went up to the 18.9%. We rounded up to 19%, and that is the allocation that's initially set aside for these fund pools. In 2015, the American Indian Earmark Fund Pool, which was one large fund pool for all of the reservations, was split into the individual 9 reservation fund pools. And then the 19% was split out from based on the land within each individual reservation there. That's a starting point. There we actually have a starting like base allocation. So like Flandreau Sioux Tribe, that one is a very small acreage. So we had a small, a kind of a base allocation, and then went up from there based on the size. And like I said, as far as I know, these earmarked funds were never intended to be strictly for tribal members. It's for the land within the reservation and any fee and trust outside of the reservation. The fund pool that we have in EQIP and also within CSP is that there is a socially disadvantaged, is the term that they use. It is based on race, essentially, is what qualifies you for that socially disadvantaged fund pool. And those funds are the funds that are strictly targeted towards an individual person.
So as a follow-up question, you say that it's tied to the land, not the person. I totally understand that. We live in that world all the time with other government agencies, for instance, with payment in lieu of taxes in the form of impact aid for schools. That's tied to the trust land, not to the Indian or the person living on the land. But when you say that it's tied to the land inside the reservation and any fee and trust land outside the reservation, and not make the distinction that fee land be owned by a tribal member or someone of tribal descent, then they're able to take money from this reservation pool and use it off the reservation as long as it's fee land off the reservation owned by someone living on the reservation, whether they're native or not. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So what is the reason of having a reservation pool set aside if non-native people can own land off the reservation and get access to this funding?
It isn't necessarily intended for the non-native people outside of the reservation. It's intended to improve the land within the reservation.
What is the distinction for the off-reservation fee land then? If it's meant to handle the stuff within the reservation.
And that was included as in, and maybe the term is written wrong here, but it was the basically the tribal trust or fee lands outside of the reservation.
In the chat earlier, let me get back to that so I don't misquote her. Carrie Jo said, within what South Dakota reservation or South Dakota Indian fee land or trust land are the majority of the PLU located? That or is what gets the non-trust, non-tribal producers eligible for targeted funds.
But
in the language that go ahead.
Misconception here is that these targeted funds are not meant to be targeted to the producer. they're targeted to the area.
I understand that, but I think the distinction of them being a reservation pool and not like the whatever Powder County gets, which is across the river where there's no reservation, is tied to the status of the land. And the status of that land is it being native owned, not the individual, but native owned fee land or trust land that is owned by the individual or by the tribe in common. I don't think it's a free for all. Anybody who has fee land on the reservation should be able to eat all this stuff up. Otherwise, why have the distinction is my point.
The original discussion on that, this is David Pasiska, was there was 11% tribally owned and trust property on the reservations. And there was 19% if we included the fee land and the land outside the reservations that was owned by the tribes. So we had a meet at similar tribal advisory meetings, and we discussed, do you want the 19% so anybody could apply, so you'd have a shot at 8% more money, or do you want to designate it for just the tribal members and only have 11%? And this committee decided at that time that they wanted a shot at the 19%. And one of the things we did in our ranking was put in there that if you were a tribal member or you was applying land practices on tribal or trust land, then you would rank a little higher. So we did have that in our previous ranking.
Is that in the current ranking as well?
No, it isn't in the current ranking right now. I apologize. I cannot find the history as to why that question was removed from the rankings. If that is something that this group wants to add back into a ranking, we can certainly do that. But again, your application we have an overlap in the reservation fund pools to our resource unit fund pools. So your application should be considered in your reservation fund pool. It should be considered in your resource unit fund pool. It should be considered in socially disadvantaged fund pool if you qualify for that status as a producer. And any initiative fund pool out there that your application would qualify for. And that was what Val was getting at when we were doing more of a program neutral funding opportunity. EQIP does not limit by size. EQIP is not supposed to limit by status of a producer. It is simply evaluating the resource concerns that are being addressed and the environmental benefits that are being applied to that land by those practices. So we can reduce back down to the 11%, like David had said, and make it be specifically only to those trust and fee and tribal grounds.
Well, I think it's important.
I don't want to put words in David's mouth, but I don't think that's what he said. I think he said we had it that way before so that we could get access to more, but there was a priority ranking system for tribal members. And then what we need to go back to is not the 11%. Let's keep it at the 19%, but let's put the priority ranking back in there for them.
We can certainly put that question back into the ranking.
Okay.
I guess I can rephrase that as long as Laura is supportive of that decision.
Okay, so how about as far as all of the discussion that we've had, which has been great discussion. Thanks so much, Mr. Guthrie, for everything that you're bringing up and the comments that you're making. I would say if the group has recommendations as far as moving forward, of course, keep in mind, we are in the middle of our program year this year. We cannot make changes right now at this point, but it's definitely something that we can look at moving forward that can be something that is considered for next year. So if you have recommendations as far as a committee, as far as the Tribal Advisory Committee, please feel free to submit those recommendations to me. That is something I know that I'm just acting right now and I am only in the state for a time period, but I will ensure that we follow up on those recommendations. That's definitely something that's put in the minutes that we will consider for our future funding, because we want to make sure, first of all, that you all understand completely how the ranking works, And if there's other things that need to be included, we definitely want to take those into consideration. So again, if you have recommendations, please let us know that. I saw a great recommendation that came in from Kelsey just a little bit ago. I know that we try to have these meetings on a quarterly basis. I know there's a lot of discussion during these meetings. There's some recommendations, but one thing that was mentioned is maybe at the beginning of our next meeting is a review of the minutes from this, some of the discussion that took place, some of the recommendations. So you will know as far as an agency what NRCS did as far as follow-up and things that are being considered. Okay, thanks so much, Jen and Val, and David for your explanation and clarification on that. I will ask right now if there's any other questions, if there's any other comments. We definitely want this to be a meeting that's beneficial to you. Yes, we're presenting on NRCS programs, but we want this to be a benefit to you. If there's other information that you would like to see us provide, please don't hesitate to let us know. We're looking right now at tentative dates possibly for this next meeting to be in August or September. If that date works for you, if it doesn't, reach out to us, let us know. If you have information where there are others that need to be included on this invite, I apologize. I know that having these meetings virtually is very difficult. It would be much easier to meet in person and have this discussion face to face. It would be very interactive. So I apologize for that. Hopefully, as we move forward as an agency and our government offices begin to open back up, and we can provide training and have meetings, that this next meeting can be held face to face. But just right now, out of concern for our employees and for our partners and for the producers' safety and health, we will continue having these virtually. But thank you so much to those that participated today, and I will open it up to any final comments or questions.
I'm just going to drop a quick blurb in the chat so everybody has access to the links, but the Intertribal Agriculture Council is hosting summer internships in South Dakota and North Dakota through our cooperative agreements with NRCS in each of those states. So if you do know of a young individual that would be interested in exploring what career opportunities exist in natural resources and they're looking for summer employment, we are targeting primarily Native youth to try to enhance our incoming pool of tribal land stewards out there. But please share widely so that we can reach youth that are interested.
And you will drop that in the chat box?
Yes, I will.
And will this application be on USA.gov or just a different site?
Great question. We're actually hosting the application on our website.
Okay, thank you.
Kelsey, did you put that on the South Dakota Range Club?
I have not yet. We just made the announcement internally yesterday, so it's hot off the press, but I'll get it there.
Okay, cool. Perfect.
Okay, thanks so much, Kelsey. Also, one last thing that I just want you to be on the lookout for. This will be in the future, but Gov Delivery is a new way that the government's doing business as far as getting word out on our programs, on updates, on things that are going on as far as the agency. Gov Delivery will not only be for NRCS, but it will also be for the FSA offices. So just want to make sure that if you're interested on updates as far as our programs and things that are going on as far as both agencies, to be on the lookout for Gov Delivery. It's something that you can sign up for and you can get regular emails on. So just want to make sure you're on the lookout for that. I know there's been some other comments in the chat. I won't go back and read all of those. There were some recommendations on providing a breakout as far as the funds that are set aside for each of the tribes and the funding pool. Maybe one thing that we need to consider as we are funding programs and we know a little bit more later on in the fiscal year, maybe a breakdown, not necessarily it won't be by names because we have to protect the PII, but maybe how many applications that we did receive. Of those applications, which ones are eligible and how many of those that are funded. Please keep in mind, as far as eligibility, when you apply for our programs, there's still a process as far as eligibility in the Farm Service Agency and the adjusted gross incomes and some of those forms that have to be filled out. So we don't want you to forget about those, but maybe that's a breakout that we need to provide in the future, but we'll definitely put that down in our notes. But any last questions or comments? Okay, I don't see anything coming in, and we're right at 12 o'clock. So out of respect for your time, thank you so much for joining us today. As acting state conservationist right now in South Dakota, I am honored to be able to sit in on this meeting and hear from all of you. Thanks so much to Sunny Farmer for presenting today and some of the questions that came in from Mr. Guthrie. We appreciate those. And if there's anything in the future that NRCS can do to help you out, please don't hesitate to let us know. But thank you so much and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.